Hey everyone, and welcome to a special episode that dropped in two of your favorite podcast feeds, Wits and Weights and the Mind Muscle Connection. I'm one of your co-hosts today, Phillip Pape of the Wits and Weights podcast, and I'm thrilled to share the virtual with the man himself, Jeff Hain of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Jeff, thanks, man, for on this Q&A.
Yeah, no, thanks for setting this up. You definitely took the lead on this, and you were keeping me very accountable to making sure that this ran smoothly. So I appreciate your ability to keep things running smoothly like that. It was certainly helpful, and you do a great job with all this stuff. And really looking forward to doing this as well too.
Yeah, man, you always step up to the plate. I know how professional you are in the podcasting game, and it was super easy and efficient, I'll say, to get ready for today. We didn't have to do a ton of prep, but it's going to be solid. So yeah.
Yeah, and the way your professionalism with the podcasting and how you have things set up definitely was eye-opening to me, especially the first time when I came on before, and then getting this set up. Like, you definitely are really good at getting this stuff together, and definitely shows with how the podcast is growing and everything like that. Just wanted to give you a shout out for that. Like, super organized, man. I wish I had a sixth of your organization skills, and I would be doing a lot better if that were the case.
Dude, don't sell yourself short. Trust me. You're one of the guys I listened to early on and inspired me. So you get the information out there, and to this day, I have you in my feed. So that's one of the reasons I reached out to you to do this.
I'm still on there. That's good.
Yeah, no, for sure. Oh, there's Jeff again, man. No, for sure. For those listening to my audience or in Wits and Weights, before we dive into the Q&A, I do want to quickly introduce Jeff. He was on an episode a long time ago I think we talked about maintenance, and he is the host of the Mind Muscle Connection, Jeff Hain, one of the shows in my feed, because he gets to the nuts and bolts, the mental side as well, fitness and nutrition, and it's all science-based. But he also interviews some really cool guests like Steve Hall, which he introduced me to, and then I had him on the show. So again, I'm grateful for that. The main thing is your shows are super practical. They focus on things like body recomp, which don't often get enough attention, but are important phases that a lot of people want to live in. I get questions all the time. What if I don't want to bulk? What if I don't want to cut? I just want to get the best of everything. And he's got a really good workshop on that as well. So I want everybody listening to my show to go subscribe or follow his podcast, which again is called The Mind Muscle Connection. Over to you, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great intro. I appreciate that. So for my audience, as we're co-hosting this, so Phillip he hosts the Wits and Weights podcast. So he has a wide range of coaches on. I feel every week you have new coaches on that I'm not familiar with. So you do a great job, I feel like, of bringing those type of people on. But also you've had people that my audience is probably familiar with, right? You've had Brandon on, I think, a couple times. You had Brian Borstein on, you had Jordan Lips on, you had Steve Hall on. So definitely some carryover there as well too. And I know for you have multiple episodes a week. You go over nutrition, lifting, muscle, metabolism, and fat loss. And I think you also give your unique perspective on things as well. I know you had your shoulder injury surgery that you had recently. Getting that insight into it is super helpful. And so you also do a great job of making it practical for everybody as well too. And I think that's key, right? Because some of the science-based stuff, it can go over people's head, and we feel like we're smart when we say it, but do people actually understand that as well? So I think you do a great job of that. And like I said, you're very professional. You're a super nice dude, awesome dude, down to earth. So I think that's another thing that can't go unnoticed. And again, everything's professional, from your podcast logo, your background, everything, the sound, like, it all sounds great. So make sure you give him a follow as well too. Follow and subscribe, and enjoy this episode and obviously all future episodes as well too. So again, looking forward to doing this with you.
And I appreciate all of that. And I forgot Brian Borstein's another guy. See, if I listen to your show, I look who you bring on, I'm like, let me just go reach out to that guy and have him on my show too, because they're awesome individuals.
I'll do that sometimes too, where if I'm like, okay, who should I bring on? Always go and check out other people's like podcasts as well too. And one other thing I wanted to say before we dive into, Phillip, can you hear that in the background by chance?
A little bit.
Let me shut the window real quick here on this. Sorry. Of course, nobody's been working and they decide to do that now. Yeah. Shoot, now I feel like I'm going to forget what I was going to say. Oh, it's going to come back to me. What were we just talking about real quick? Sorry, man.
We were talking about the practical side and having people on. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you were getting at.
I had a good point. I hope it comes back to me. I apologize. Man, I am upset now. Hopefully it comes back to me. I'm going to be thinking on it. I might cut you off and tell you.
No, you know what? And I can have the edit. Like, I'm going to edit this part out. I leave it out. But it's funny. You also mentioned something about like science-based and also making it practical. And it's funny. One of the episodes I actually got a bad review on the podcast I was talking about how fat is oxidized and released from the body and all this. And it's like, this guy sounds like a Wikipedia article and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh my God. Stuff like that hits your ego. But then you realize there's always some truth, and people are looking for understanding. So even if there's a little bit of truth there, I want to keep improving based on that.
Yeah. And that's another cool thing with you too, right? You, like you said, you want to learn, you want to get better. And instead of letting that hold you down, you take it and you get better. And I think that's part of this whole process. And this is what I wanted to mention actually. So it did come back to me. I knew it would. You also introduced me to listening to some podcasts on improving podcasting. And I am all about self-development, and I like never thought about doing that. And so that's been super helpful. The Podcast Growth University that I listen to, and man, that's been super helpful. So I appreciate you sharing that with me when we connected. I think that was like a couple months ago already. So
cool, man. Yeah, no, all these are skills, right? They're just skills. You got to put time into them if you can. We have busy lives. So it's which one do you do? The training, the nutrition, the podcasting, and so on. Yeah. Yeah. All of them. I know all of them. Let's just do them all. It's more about harmony than balance is the way somebody put it to me.
Yep.
Cool, man. So for today's Q&A, what we did is we each chose 3 questions from each of our communities. So we're going to smush them together. We'll do Jeff's 3 first and then my 3, but we're going to take, and then you guys, the listener and the viewers, can hear both perspectives. So you get a really well-rounded, solid idea of the things to consider in your own, fitness and nutrition journey. So I'm just going to ask you the first one, which is from your community, Jeff. And it's a classic one about training. And that is, how long should you rest between sets for muscle growth and strength?
So rest between sets for muscle growth. This is one that I get commonly. And I think people overthink it, but then people also want this exact time. And I think they think there's this like magic amount. Now, as we get into this, there probably is we're talking, I think we need to understand that we're going to take this from a muscle growth and strength perspective. I do think from a strength perspective, there probably isn't a magic time, but you probably want to make sure that with strength, you're resting enough in between, right? So we can touch base on some of these numbers, but that's, the kind of background on that, right? Like people will ask all the time. When I remember back when I first started training, it's like, what do my rest times need to be? Do I need to sit there and watch on my watch like every last second and then go? Or can you auto-regulate it a little bit more? And from my perspective, this is something that I have changed in terms of, I think you want to auto-regulate it a little bit more. And what I mean by that is you can have a time frame, but you want to go off of your feeling and your feelings and how you're feeling in that moment versus, okay, 2 minutes, I got 8 seconds, boom. Okay. Now I can go again. So I don't think you need to do that. So I think you can auto-regulate it. And so what I'll do is I'll go over what are some things you can look at and what are some kind of general times, and then maybe when would this change? So let's start from a muscle building standpoint. So in the research, I think there was a recent study that kind of showed, hey, 2 to 3 minutes, you should rest in between sets. And that's going to lead to more muscle growth than if you rest it for 30 seconds or a minute. But when you dive in a little bit deeper, when you actually match the volume, yes, if you're doing 3 sets and then 3 sets and you rest for 1 minute and then you rest for 3 minutes, because you're resting longer in the 3-minute one, and again, I'm just making up numbers here, you will see more hypertrophy, right? Because you're more rested, you can maintain that volume load, you can maintain your intensity. But if you add in a few more sets in the shorter rest time, that can offset some of that, right? So increasing like your training density. So if you do go shorter rest, you could potentially just rest less, and that will offset some of that, right? So that's the background there on the hypertrophy side of things. So I think what would be some practical numbers there? I think again, 2 to 3 minutes, I think is solid. And then again, for more isolated stuff, maybe 1 to 2 minutes there on that. But this is also going to be dependent on how you feel and probably the exercises that you're doing. So if you're doing more compound lifts, leg stuff, heavier stuff, probably closer to 3 minutes and beyond there potentially with that, because those are going to take more out of it for you. More isolation exercises, bicep curls, smaller muscle groups, maybe you can do closer to 1 minute, right? So those are some practical numbers that you can take. But to take it from an auto-regulatory standpoint, you could also go off of your breathing in between sets. So if you're like sitting there, okay, I need to do a minute and a half, but it's like a minute and a half in, you're like breathing super heavy and you're not ready to go. It's okay. Maybe you need to rest a little bit longer there on that. What does the target muscle feel like? Is it still burning? Do you still feel it? Okay, maybe you need to rest a little bit longer. But if it's feeling good, hey, it's probably time to go there with that. So those would be my 2 big ones there. And then also, again, if you're doing more compound lifts, how's like your core feeling? Like, is that ready to go, or is that still tired? Because if that's still tired and fatigued, you might want to rest a little bit longer. And then just your general sense of, are you ready to hit the next set as well too, right? And again, I think if you can think about this practically, like when you're doing like lateral raises or a bicep curl, it's okay, do you need 4 minutes rest on that? You're probably checking all those boxes off way earlier there with that. Again, I think I gave you some practical numbers to hit, but then also you can utilize some of those other proxies as well too. And then I think also there are going to be times when you're training for hypertrophy that you may do some like incomplete rest periods, right? You may do myo rep sets, you may do drop sets, right? So again, those could be some things that you could potentially incorporate in, but just again, that would be the goal there is incomplete rest on that, right? You're not trying to rest in between. So I think from a hypertrophy perspective, I think resting longer is never a bad idea because you're going to preserve, like you're going to be more recovered, you're going to be ready to go. And I think resting longer is not going to hurt you. Whereas I do think under resting could potentially hurt you unless that is the goal on there with that. The only downside with resting longer would be that's more time that you're going to be at the gym. So if you want to increase that efficiency a little bit, you could improve that. So I think that kind of summed up the hypertrophy side of things pretty well. I can go into strength, or I don't know if you want to hit on the hypertrophy side first before I go into strength or
I can. And we were joking beforehand that we're going to agree 90% on this stuff. And you're like exactly mirroring the notes I had. I had some of the studies originally suggested 1 to 2 minutes. And I'm like, but I like 2 to 3. And you're like, yeah, 2 to 3. So the only things I would add to that is if you're not used to these slightly longer rest periods, especially for strength, as we're going to get into it, it can help to have a timer initially, almost like tracking your food. It's just giving you a baseline of what that feels like. Because for some people, 2 minutes might seem like a long time if they're used to just banging out reps constantly in the gym. The other thing is I do love the auto regulation and feeling it. Give yourself more time if needed for sure. And then what was I going to say about that? Don't get distracted though. Like some people in the gym, they get on their phone, they start doing email and stuff. It doesn't really answer. This is not really answering the original question necessarily, but if people give themselves a license to rest for 5 minutes, it can become 8 or 10 if you start walking around looking at your email. And then you mentioned the intensity techniques already, which, just this morning I was doing bicep curls and like drop sets. And you're right. In that case, the goal is to shorten the time, and the main reason for that is usually time efficiency. Eric Helms and Mike Zordos came out with an article just in Mass yesterday, I think, about drop intensity techniques. And they covered 3 different ones, and they compared like not using them versus using them and how you can save like a half hour in the gym every time you go. So that could be a really good reason for it.
Yeah.
Go for it, man.
On your kind of resting too long in between, I think from like a physiological standpoint, you're not going to do any harm by resting that long. Right. But from a mental perspective, like you said, what's your engagement now of what you're doing right now? It's like your mind's elsewhere. So I think that would be the thing to look out with that. It's not like again, if you were to like study things physiologically, like you're not going to see a difference. You might see a little bit better because you're resting longer, but it's like mentally, you're just not going to be as engaged, I feel like, anymore. Because this reminds me of back when during COVID, I was training at home, and there's just so many things that you can freaking do at home. So I just found that I just meant from a mental standpoint, I wasn't staying as engaged in the workouts for that reason. Yeah. Again, the longer rest may have been helpful, but because I wasn't as like mentally engaged, that was the issue there. But you make a good point on like getting started. If you're used to like maybe more of like a circuit style of training, like those kind of like group classes, fat loss style workouts, that may be a little bit of an adjustment for you, like you said there with that. But I think also, as you get more advanced and you do it, it's like you start to learn how to push yourself a little bit more from a hypertrophy perspective. Yep. I think you get better at that, and you almost want a little bit of a longer rest time. Whereas like initially I could see where maybe you do have to go slightly lower with everything because you're just not, the intensity is not there yet and everything like that. But that goes back to what we talked about with the proxies as well too.
Yeah. One last thing is you alluded to the strength regime of just being longer rest periods. And I know I found early on when I did starting strength years ago, and it was like, yeah, you can rest 5, 7, 8, even 10 minutes. I'm like, that's crazy, until I got into super heavy sets of 5 deadlifts. I'm like, now I understand I need all the rest. And when by rest, I meant like sitting on my ass for just that time and letting my heart rate and everything get restored. It's crazy.
On strength real quick, that's where you do probably want to make sure you do rest a little bit longer in between, because with strength work, you want to make sure you're fresh and you're able to lift the loads that you need to. So that would be a time. And I feel like you do a little bit more kind of strength this type training overall, at least from what I see on Instagram. Probably. That would be something that like you would want to make sure that you do rest enough if you're going for strength, right? Because you really do want to make sure that you're recovered and ready to go. Where I feel like with hypertrophy, we have a little bit more of a leeway there with that potentially, right? Where it's like with strength, you can't use that kind of concept that we talked about of resting less and then getting in more volume, because you want to make sure you can move the heavy loads that you need to lose or move in strength. So that would be the only difference there from like a strength perspective versus muscle growth.
Yeah. In fact, it's cool. You can take a hybrid approach almost, where if you're doing a heavy, light, medium style program, on a heavy day, you're going to take the full on rest as long as you need, but light, medium day, you're probably pushing speed and volume anyway, so that you can use rest periods as a training variable. I've had it like programmed in. I'm going to do 30 seconds or I'm going to do 90 seconds specifically to show progression week over week based on that rest period. An interesting angle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. Cool. Anything else you wanted to add to that one or anything? You want to
I
hop
think it's
into?
good.
We gave people plenty of stuff I think to work with there on that, but we never really gave an exact number, and that's unfortunately how I feel like how it always is going to be. You're never going to get an exact number with things there.
1 to
So
10 minutes, 30 seconds to 10 minutes.
figure it out. Cool. All right. Another question I got was: are there too many cons of cutting during periods of low sleep? Should I just stay at maintenance calories?
So when I hear a question like this, my instinct is just to say yes or no. And then I step back as a coach and I'm like, why are we asking about low sleep? That would be the first question I want to know is this a temporary part of your life because you're going to have a baby and you're going to have 3 months where you know you're going to be shot? Or is it something something you've accepted as part of your life? Or is it a job issue or something like that with your schedule and you just can't get around it? I don't know. So that's the first thing I would ask is, do you have to have all this low sleep? Because I think sleep is on the top 3 things that affect your strength and muscle development and recovery, along with training and nutrition, like in my opinion. So I would ask what it is. If it's a temporary part of your life, I would say maybe not a good idea to cut at the same time, right? If cutting isn't something you absolutely have to do for some specific reason, maybe do it when you're outside of that period. Consider the long-term consequences of that, because cutting calories on top of sleep deprivation is going to have just a massive impact on your insulin, your hunger hormones, your satiety, your everything. It's going to be harder to stick to the calorie deficit, let alone the stress that it's putting on your body. So yeah, I would say they go against each other. But if you're going to be at a period of low sleep for the next 3 years and there's nothing you can do about it, you might have to make some trade-off to fit in a very conservative cut at some point, but make the trade-off so you're not going all out aggressive on your cut and all out 5 hours of sleep a day. That's my first thought on that.
No, that's a good point, right? Okay, why are you getting that poor sleep, right? Are you just accepting it because you don't want to get more sleep, or is it like you actually have something going on? Because I think that's, like you said, that's super important to find out there, because you're probably going to have to fix that at some point if you really want to improve your body composition and things like that. And then, yeah, no, those were all great points. And then, like you said, though, if you can't, like something's going on and you're not going to be able to get good sleep for 3 years or something like that, or whatever it may be, like, okay, now we do probably have to go in and potentially change things up. Sorry, somebody just rang the doorbell, of course, right now.
I have dogs too, man.
And sorry, hopefully he's done. Okay. If it is going to be 3 years, yes, going into a less aggressive approach is probably going to be the way to go there with that. Like you said, maybe we're not going to be able to go all out and lose as much weight as we want. It might have to be a little bit slower there with that to offset some of that. Those are great points there with that. But I think this person specifically that asked it, I think they just had a new child. So that would certainly be a time that you're not going to get great sleep. And we both would probably be like, hey, we're not going to cut during this time. And I think you hit on it. The big things are higher hunger, right? Cravings. That's going to lead to poor decision-making, lower willpower, right? From that, which is just going to make the deficit harder. You're just going to have like more friction, like you said, insulin, higher hunger, things like that. But for me, the big thing is the lean body mass loss, right? That would be the thing that I would be most concerned about there with that, with the lean body mass loss. So there was a study, man, he freaking just keeps going. So there was a study, and again, I don't have the exact study here, but they looked at 2 groups, right? So one group had 8.5 hours of sleep, another had 5.5 hours of sleep, and they both were in an energy deficit. The group that was at 5.5 hours lost more lean body mass. They lost the same amount of weight, but they lost more lean body mass. So that just goes to show that potentially that's going to be a thing that we need to look out for here, is that lean body mass loss, which in turn, I think with that leads to other issues down the line, right? We lose lean body mass during fat loss. You're probably going to be a little bit hungrier. And then on the way up, you're going to want to regain that weight. And now you do that quickly. Now you're going to gain more body fat. Now you're going to be at the same weight, but more fat, less muscle there. So I think the lean body mass one, to me, is the big thing that we need to look out for there with that. So
Question about that study. Do you know what the training and the protein was like there?
I actually went over this on my Instagram, and I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to look. I'm going to keep talking while I go through this, but I'm pretty sure that they weren't weight training, right? So that's obviously a big thing there with that. Obviously, we want to make sure we weight train. I don't think they tracked protein, and I would imagine that if these people weren't training, they probably did not care about protein either. So that's a great point. And I think that was one of the kind of caveats I had with this study, was that what were those 2 things there with that? If you have anything to say, let me know. I'm looking up
Nonetheless, and I'm not challenging it. It's just I always ask those questions about the studies, because hopefully if you are training and eating protein, that impact is lessened, if not negligible. I don't know. I know sleep deprivation, there are plenty of studies that show just a cascade of very negative impacts, even when you're gaining weight, in terms of like fat storage, visceral fat storage, and stuff like that. And a lot of people misconstrue like the lack of sleep and weight gain as if it's causing you to gain weight. But I think a lot of it just comes down to the loss of muscle mass, like you said, and also the hunger, just the ravenous hunger. People will consume like 500 calories more a day by having an hour or two less of sleep on a ad libitum type diet. So did you find it?
I did. And so on that real quick before I dive into that, like you said, and from my understanding, we just have this higher propensity to want more highly palatable food in that process as well too, which that's going to lead to higher, you're going to want that tastier stuff. So if you have that on top of it, your willpower is lower, you're just going to want more and more of that there. So that's going to be an issue with this study. So I did mention there was some limitation. So this is by Nedelcheva in 2010. So just to give somebody actual name there for that. In my post I made, I said there were some limitations to the study. It was a small sample size, so it wasn't a lot of people. Okay. It was only 14 days. So it was only 2 weeks. They didn't lift weights. And obviously when we look at lean body mass, it's not just muscle, right? It can also be glycogen storage. It can be bones, organs, water, and everything else that isn't body fat. So we also need to take that into consideration there with that.
Yeah. And I don't want the person asking the question to use any of that as a reason not to listen to everything we're saying here, which is don't cut aggressively and lose sleep all at the same time. Pick one or the other or make the trade-off. I see it as like a seesaw. One could be a little worse, one a little better. And you can, as one gets better, you've got a little more leeway on the other. It's a matter of trade-offs and how you feel, really, the biofeedback that you're tracking along the way.
Yep. And I know probably anybody that's gotten poor sleep, like you just know how it can impact you from that perspective. I think motivation too, right? Like now you're going to be less motivated to train and want to do those things that you need to do as well too. Cool. Yeah. So again, this would definitely be a time that I like, and it sounds like you're in agreement with me. If it's a short-term thing, we're probably not going to fat loss diet during this time. I just actually, before we hopped on here, I had a conversation with a client about thinking about going into fat loss. And it's just, if you don't do it right now, it's like, can you never do it again? Do you have to do it right now? You know what I mean? I think a lot of times we think that we have to like go and do it right now. And if we're not fat loss dieting, we're not going to see any progress whatsoever. And that's just not the case. So I think sometimes taking the pressure off of that can be super helpful.
For sure. Yeah. And a good coach or community who's telling you that, just look, do you really have to do this? If not, I'm giving you the tough love. Let's not. You're going to feel so much better. We can fit it in another time when it makes more sense. Let's check all the boxes first and let's go. But yeah. All right. You want to go to the next one?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
right.
I'm ready.
So question 3, this is the last one from Jeff's community, and I'm asking it to Jeff. The question, I'm gaining a little too much weight in a building phase. What do I do?
Cool. I like this because I thought this was a great question just because, again, a lot of times I think people have that urge to just go back to cutting. So I think real quick, I'll go what I describe as a building phase because I think there's some semantics involved with this. Like what exactly is a building phase? To me, a building phase is just a period of time where you're out of a calorie deficit, right? You could be at maintenance, you could be in a surplus, but we're trying to minimize fat gain, maximize muscle growth, and really just the main thing is we're trying to get out of a calorie deficit, right? Within that kind of parameters there, you may end up gaining some weight, right? So I think the big thing is if you get to that point where you gain too much weight, it's like, what do I do? Do I just go back to cutting or whatnot? And I think we have some options here. It isn't just, hey, you just have to cut. And I think doing that too much, I think can lead to issues, right? If you just go straight into, oh, I've gained a little bit of weight, I need to go back to cutting. I think that's from a body comp standpoint, I think you're setting yourself up for failure in that situation. I think if you can find some ways to potentially improve your adherence or whatever it is during this building phase, it can go a long way. So the first thing I would do in this situation is I would run an energy audit with a client, right? So an energy audit is going to be like, okay, how adherent are we to the plan? Are you adherent? And a lot of times I think people think they're more adherent than what they are. And then you actually dive into it and it's, holy crap, I'm actually only adherent 60% of the time. So boom, you don't need to make any adjustment. Just you need to improve that, right? Yep. That's the big thing first. And that's the boring, oh, no, that can't be the issue. But Phillip, I'm sure you can say the same thing here. Like when it comes to nutrition, adherence is the issue. I say 90%. I think I'm underselling how much it is. So it's at least 90% and probably more than that, probably 99%. So looking at adherence. And I think again, like that's the first thing that I would do there with that. Also looking at just your movement. Where's your movement at? Could that potentially be an increase? So again, is it just your steps or whatever it is? Has that potentially gone down? So looking at that. But from there, I think when it comes to, everybody's a little bit different in terms of how they monitor food intake with their clients and stuff like that. But I do like to have clients track calories and like at least protein. And so for them, it's going to be, are there some potential tracking errors that are going on? And again, if adherence isn't the issue, the next thing that really can hurt people from a calorie perspective is tracking inaccuracies. And some of it is on purpose, right? But I think a lot of the times it's on accident as well too. I think that's more of an issue than anything. It's just on accident, right? You forget, I couldn't even... tell you what I ate. Yeah, I could. That's a bad example. Some people can't remember what they ate, or they can't remember what they did yesterday. So how the hell are they going to remember what they ate? You know what I mean? With that, that's the first thing there is you might forget to just log some things. You got a million things going on. Two, even if something says it has a certain amount of calories, it can be off by up to 25% plus or minus. So then we already have that's a potential issue right there, that you can be off. If you like to go out to eat, just because something says it's 500 calories, the chances of it actually having 500 calories are slim to none, right? It depends on the chef, how they make it, who's working, what serving size they give you, there with that. But then there is, again, people just forgetting how to, or the serving sizes side of things, right? So again, like getting your serving sizes off could be a big problem as well too there with that. Looking at your tracking, are you tracking your condiments? Are you tracking correctly? And typically you'll find that people are off there with that and potentially fixing that. So we're going to run an energy audit there and see if there's anything that can change there with that. And again, most of the time you're going to find that, hey, that's off. So then that's the first thing that we can do there is work on that adherence to everything, run that energy audit and see where we need to make any adjustments there with that. So that'd be the first thing. And again, like I said, a lot of times that's going to help because when you go into a building phase, you're going to get to the point to where maybe you aren't tracking as much now because you're not in a fat loss phase. You have that potentially look at there with that. So I don't know if you had anything. I have a few more. I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that one first before I go into the other one.
Yeah, you're already knocking off all the bullets on my notes, which is no surprise because the first thing I would have asked is how are you tracking? Because I want to look at all of that. Like you said, the errors, the adherence, everything else, as well as look at the expenditure side of the equation. Some people may not even know either what surplus they need to be in to gain the weight they want to gain. They are in the wrong surplus for what they're trying to gain. And that's one I want to touch on in a little bit. Or like you said, things are shifting in a direction that is unknowable because your tracking is off. And so data, right? The better the data coming in, the easier the decisions going out. And then if you're just not making the choices based on what the data is telling you, that is a different issue. So why don't you finish your list? And I'll address one piece that might be a different angle here.
Yeah, no, those are all great points, man. Like I agree. And I think the calorie one is a huge one. A couple other ones I had, the other options you have. So again, running the energy audit. And like I said, most of the time, like you'll probably find something there that you can fix with that. Again, it's something there from adherence or anything like that. Next, if you do find that everything's good and like you said, you might just be eating more calories than you want potentially, or maybe you just picked the wrong number, or again, you're accidentally just eating more overall, you can decrease your calories closer to maintenance, right? I think a lot of times people think that, oh, hey, I have to be in a calorie surplus. I have to be in a calorie surplus to build muscle. That's the only way. And that's not necessarily the case, right? I think that, again, the leaner you are, the more muscle you want to build, okay, we probably want to push a calorie surplus. But if you have moderate amount of body fat, you want to push, like your training's in a good spot, or if you're on the leaner side, you want to build a lot of muscle, like at some point you will need to get into a calorie surplus to continue to build muscle. But I think if you fall outside of those things where you're like at moderate body fat levels, you don't want to be Mr. Olympia, right? Like you have some wiggle room here to not necessarily have to be in a calorie surplus. And I think even within a building phase, maybe you started out lean and you have a lot of muscle, but then you gained some body fat in the building phase. I still think you have some wiggle room there to potentially go down to maintenance and continue to build muscle, because again, you're at higher body fat levels. Now, I think people underestimate that aspect of an energy surplus is what are your current body fat levels, because that's stored energy that you have right then and there, right? You have that option as well too, to decrease your calories closer to maintenance as well too. And that's, you can recomp in a way, right? Maybe you're not going to lose body fat, but you're going to be adding some muscle with not adding any more body fat in that process. Again, so long as your training's in a good spot, your sleep's good, you're getting enough protein and things like that.
For sure, man. I want to piggyback off that because the idea of going back to maintenance, first of all, I love that idea as like a reset, because if something else is off, if your adherence, your movement, your tracking has changed, and the movement, I know we didn't talk a lot about, but if you're moving 5,000 steps less a day because you're no longer in fat loss, you're like, I don't need to move as much, that could be pushing down your metabolic rate. And all of a sudden you're in an accidental surplus, not even meaning to be. But the idea of going back to maintenance, if you do that and then you're still gaining weight, you weren't really at your maintenance. You didn't end up at your maintenance. So that tells you something too. One little extra thing I want to throw in here is, let's say you're doing all the things and you are tracking well and your step count and everything's consistent and you're still quote unquote gaining more than you want. I would ask, are you calculating the surplus correctly? If you have a coach, hopefully they know what they're doing and they're getting you in the right surplus. But one rule of thumb I've been using a lot lately is the 2,500 calorie rule. And I want to explain that for the listener, because a lot of people haven't heard about this. We know about the 3,500 calorie rule, right? Roughly 3,500 calories of energy in a net pound of adipose tissue, a net pound of fat to lose fat. So when we lose weight, if we want to go at 1 pound a week, it's 3,500 calories or 500 calories a day. pretty simple, like cocktail napkin math. When you gain weight, however, we're not just gaining fat, right? We're gaining some ratio of fat. Muscle being about 5 times as dense as fat means that you don't need as many calories to gain 1 pound that contains half of as muscle. And so it's roughly 2/3 if you just ballparked it and said, okay, instead of a pound a week, I would actually need to gain not pound, but 2/3 of the calories a week to gain that pound if I'm going in a surplus. And therefore, if you're using the 3,500 calorie rule, you're actually eating a third more than you intended. So just a cool little fact for people trying to like thumb suck it and figure out their maintenance, their surplus calories. It's actually going to be less than in a fat loss phase.
Yeah. And again, to piggyback off that, I think that's great. I think that's a great way to set it up to make sure you don't gain too much fat in the process. I like, and maybe you do this too, but I like going off of like percentage of body weight gain as well, because that kind of tells you where exactly it's at, right? If you start gaining a little bit too much weight, chances are the quicker you gain weight, the more it's going to be body fat. So if you can go off of where your weight is trending over time, like that can be super helpful there to make sure that you are what's going towards more muscle.
Oh, yeah. I like 0.2 to 0.3 for most people. I don't know if you're in that range too. That's
ends up being about like 1% a month or something like that when you zoom out there with that. Yeah, that's the way to go. Because then that helps in your specific example there, where it's if you set your calories too high because you have to be a certain amount of calories per week. Oh, I need to be a 500 calorie surplus. So for you, that may not surplus. It may be more, maybe less, because our bodies are pretty adaptive from that perspective there with that. Okay, cool. I might have to put Dale away here in a second.
We could take a break.
Sorry. This is not how I thought this was gonna go.
Oh, good, man.
Okay, so I wanted to go over this one real quick, and then I think I'm going to put them away real quick. All right, so the other option, and this isn't super helpful, but at the end of the day, you could just keep going as well too, because at the end of the day, if you really want to build muscle, like I think taking some time away from being out of a calorie deficit, yeah, you're going to gain a little bit more body fat in the process, but is that the absolute worst thing in the world, right? Now, if you're gaining crazy amounts of body fats, okay, obviously you're going to, depending on where your body composition is at, you might want to work on that. But at the end of the day, is it the worst thing in the world to gain a little bit of body fat for a period of time? Is that going to be the worst thing for your physique? Is that going to be the worst thing for your health? Probably not. Again, unless you're already over 20% as a male, over 25% is female, like then, okay, maybe we probably don't want to just keep adding body fat. But that's my next one, is just like potentially just keep going with it. I think that's another option as well too.
That's true, because we didn't even ask the person when they say a little too much weight, is it just a reframing thing? Is it just they're uncomfortable with something that they've never done before? And maybe this is a female too, because I tend to get that. I tend to not have problems with most of my male clients gaining weight. They're like, yeah, the deadlifts are going up. Let's keep going. More with women that I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling fluffy. My pants are a little tight. Maybe that's where we focus on all the other things that are going up in a positive direction, like our lifts and like our bicep circumference and all the other fun things. Sure. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, like I said, yeah, looking at other things and reframing it, God, is super important, because again, you may not act like you said, what is that little bit of weight? Is it like, hey, you gained 2 pounds over 6 months? Okay. All right. That's a different than, hey, you've gained 15 pounds in 6 weeks. That's a different conversation. So definitely clarifying that, as I'm sure you've noticed with being a coach too, like you do need to ask these kind of follow-up questions there with that. All right. So the next one would be just end your building phase, right? But I want to caution on this, because I think if you're only been doing it for 6 weeks, it comes back to what we talked about earlier. You need to work on the adherence. You need to work on these other things first, right? That's going to be the most important thing. But if you've been doing it for 18, 24, 30 weeks, maybe it's just time to end the building phase now at this point, right? That's another option there, where seeing where you're at and how long you've been in the building phase can be key. Again, like I said, if you've been not doing it for a while, we need to work on these other things. But if it's been a while, hey, maybe it's just time to end it at that point.
Yeah, exactly. It really depends on why they're asking the question. So I'm also good with 5-6 months continuous building is a nice point to shoot for, to know for sure you've got all the anabolism that you can out of the phase and not cut yourself short. I these days like to go 9 or 10 months, because then you do a mini cut for 2 months and now you're eating a lot of food 10 months out of the year. And who doesn't like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Love eating that food. Yeah, no, I agree though. I think if you can, because I think when it comes to building muscle, I think there's some momentum to it. And I think if you're going in and out, you're just going to break up that momentum, and you're just not going to be happy with your physique long-term with that. So I think having that momentum is super key there with that. And then you just hit on the one that you said there, the last option. And I leave this last because, again, I think this is dependent on the person and your experience and everything like that. But the last one would be doing a mini cut. And I think it depends on your kind of definition of a mini cut, because like I said initially, like with the building phase, it is partly semantic, like in terms of, hey, is it a bulking phase? It just depends. And I think with fitness, there's a lot of this. One person means this way, another. And so when I say a mini cut, I'm talking a mini cut during a building phase where you would decrease your calories more than what you would like typically do in a regular cut. This is like a very short term, like anywhere from 3 to 6-ish weeks where you really cut your calories, and you could potentially use a mini cut. Now in that, you're really going to decrease your calories, and the goal is going to be, yes, a little bit of fat loss, but part of it's going to be ramping up your hunger. If hunger is something that you're dealing with where you're having a lot of hunger, this might not be a good option for you, because part of the mini cut is you're going to increase your hunger there with that, and it's going to give you more runway to continue adding weight. But what I will say, I would only do this if you're a very experienced dieter and you're working with a coach. Those would be like, if you fall outside of that, which I would say most people fall outside of that, I would be careful with a mini cut. But again, this comes down to, you mentioned a mini cut, you may mean something slightly different from that. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that in that case, I just meant a short duration cut between my bulking cycles. However, I did on my last building phase do a 2-week, like Bill Campbell-esque rapid fat loss protocol. And it was like an experiment with the whole community, like 12 other people signed on. We did it together. And that was just, it wasn't even for hunger. It was more of an experiment of, can we reset things just a little bit on the scale before we continue? And it worked pretty well, right? Because you could cut a lot in 2 or 3 weeks if you're just going all out. And honestly, after you've been eating for 8 months, you might feel like it's a nice relief for a while on your gut and everything else. And then you just say lop off 3 or 4 pounds of pure fat, and then you continue for another 4 months after that. But yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was, pretty similar to the definitions there. Because like you said, I think sometimes when people hear mini cut, they think it's just like a short-term cut. Oh, I'm just going to cut for 4 weeks. And yes, that is a mini cut, but this is where we need to be careful with like definitions and what exactly you mean there. So those are the things you can do if you gain a little too much weight in your building phase. One last thing that I want to hit on real quick on this, and this kind of overlaps everything, is if you don't feel like you're making good progress in your building phase, I think sometimes people put too much stock in the nutrition. While it is important, right? What did I say was one of the main goals of a building phase? We want to be out of a calorie deficit. But I think people overlook the training side of things. They want to have this perfect macro split, perfect surplus. Okay, what's your training look like? And it's, oh, I just go and do this. They don't have a game plan. You look, they're training 6+ reps in the tank, or they're not doing enough volume. It's, dude, your training needs to be on point. That's the most important. If you feel like you're not seeing the results that you want to see in a building phase, look at your training. I think that's the most important thing, and see if you can make that a little bit more geared towards hypertrophy, if obviously building muscle is your main goal. That kind of overlaps everything there with that. That would go into like the first thing that we would be looking at as well too.
Yeah, 100%. You don't want it to go to waste. You don't want all that weight gain to go to waste. And hopefully there's things you can track that can tell you that's happening. Like your waist size is just ballooning and your lifts are not going up. Like there, that's a pretty obvious indicator. But I think we covered a lot on that one. Feel free to go to the next question if you're good.
Yep.
I think it's you asking me now.
Okay, sorry. So this is from your community. So how do I adjust my programming during the transition from a bulk to a cut? Which training variables are most important?
This is a big topic, right? Like we could easily fit a 2-hour-long episode talking about training during a cut. And originally I was going to answer the question directly. What are the variables I care about? And at the end of the day, I think they all matter. I like intensity, like load, as the driving variable for holding on to that muscle mass. But I do think there's still a lot of play with volume, with sets, with recovery too, because recovery is going to be even more important. If you want to think of it as its own training variable, it can be helpful. What I come down to, though, is the overall answer here is, if you can have a program that helps you auto-regulate. You mentioned auto-regulation before in a different context, but for training, whether it's rep ranges, whether it's percent RM, whether it's RPE, even set progression, like a lot of ways to do that, you'll be able to continue pushing and training hard. We talk training hard, proximity to failure, a few reps shy of failure, whatever that means. And that's really what we're trying to get, right? Is that stimulus. So for me, I like hypertrophy style programs with rep ranges. I like percent RM based, like West Side style can be actually useful in a cut, believe it or not, where you're pushing your 1RM for the day, which may not be your PR, but then you can do back offs based on that so that you're hitting it hard. And then I also like the idea of spreading out fatigue, not locking yourself in the idea that it has to be 3 days, 5 days, 6 days, whatever. That recovery is very hard to come by the more deep you get into a fat loss phase. So all of these forms of auto-regulation that that let you just train hard and get the stimulus is a principle-based answer that I wanted to start with. And then we can get into things like, okay, but what about specific training variables? And this is where I'm going to turn it over to the master coach and trainer, Jeff Haynes.
No, that's a good point. I think no matter what, like you said, even if you're in a cut or a bulk, like you want that training intensity to be there. So that's super important. That needs to be there. And again, this goes back to, hey, what are these specific variables? And are you pushing yourself? Is that effort there, right? And if that's not there, like you need to make sure that's there. So I think as far as some smaller things go, the only, like when I saw this question, the only thing I could really think of that I say would be different, because like you hit on the intensity, we still want that to be there, would be maybe like, again, this is from a building muscle perspective. That's usually where I come from on these things, is maybe volume, but there's no like direct research that shows, hey, you need to do more or less volume. I think it comes back to what you said, auto-regulating it. Like, can you recover from it? Or if you are, then you should probably, you can keep it the same. Maybe you can add more if you're recovering from it. If you're not recovering from it, do you need to decrease it a little bit? Or do you need to look at your sleep and other things outside? You need to improve. If you're going to a cut, do you maybe need to change your meal timing around to make sure you have plenty of food around your training sessions? Those would be things there with that. But I find that, like, again, the big thing that you want to do is, if you're transitioning from a bulk to a cut, is you really don't want to change anything. I think you need to, I think you need to train the same, right? Train like you're still going to build muscle, act like you're going to build muscle. I think a lot of times, and this is why I hear from clients that are going into fat loss phase, oh, I just know that training's going to suck, and I know I'm going to not build any muscle during this period of time. And I'm like, are you sure though? Are you sure that you're not going to do that? Is that more of a mental thing that you think, because you've heard this, that, oh, hey, that's going to happen, this isn't the best, you're not in a surplus, or you're not going to build muscle? But we have research that shows that you can still build some muscle in a small calorie deficit under the right circumstances. Because I think if you go into it thinking like training's going to suck, I'm not going to build any muscle, I think mentally now you go into your training sessions, and that kind of impacts how hard you can push yourself in your training. And then, now you're going to set yourself up to not really push as hard. So I would challenge you, not you, Phillip, on this, but I would challenge the listener. Are you for sure not going to build muscle? And are you for sure your training's going to be impacted, right? So I think at the end of the day, you don't want to change how you're training your weight training in a cut, from a bulk to a cut.
Yeah. And so I have some more things that came up since you just triggered a lot of great discussion there. One is about the maintaining of muscle mass. We've seen studies that show as little as 1/8 the volume is potentially can maintain your muscle mass. Now, I believe that's not necessarily also while you're in a cut. Like there's some trade-off you're making, but it takes a lot less volume to just maintain muscle mass. Jeff said maybe you can still even build a little bit, or you may need to overcompensate for that minimum during fat loss, because you don't have all the resources coming in. You're trying to keep the protein high, but you don't have many carbs. Your probably sleep is a little bit tougher to come by and all of that. The second thing is people don't realize you're losing weight. So if your reps stay the same and your load's the same, your relative strength just went up. That's really important from a framing perspective to say, no, I'm not actually getting weaker. I'm just getting lighter. It's like when you're the other direction, you do chin-ups and you get heavier and you get the same reps, same thing. You actually just got stronger. So think about that. There's also a difference between strength and muscle mass. The lack of energy and lack of resources and lack of carbs may cause you to feel like you're less strong or like you're losing strength, but you might still get the reps and you're still holding on to that muscle. So there's a lot of psychology and mind games going on. And then recovery, I do want to come back to that, especially for us older guys and ladies, when there's a lot of life stress. Sleep can be a little bit hard to come by. You're worried about the joints and all that. And now you're lifting heavy with very few calories coming in. It can all add up together to where you really have to pay attention to that biofeedback of your soreness and your ability to get through a session. Think about, are you training fasted or not? Because that can make a big difference. When are you eating your carbs during the day? You might have to make some subtle changes based on this like limited pie of food coming in. The last thing I was thinking of is if you are more strength focused and you're doing like a sets across or a 5x5, 3x5 type program, that is going to be very difficult to progress during fat loss. And you could get discouraged if you're not just pushing the weight every session. So that's where you want to get creative and maybe switch to rep range scheme. Or even I've done something in the past, Jeff, I did a sets-based progression during fat loss that was super effective, where you start at 3 sets, you do 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, and then reset at a slightly higher load. And the body's ability to handle the submaximal during fat loss seems to be more effective, and then you're still getting all the volume. So just threw a whole bunch of details in there that I thought that came up from.
You brought up a ton of great points in there. I think you really don't want to change much other than, and I think again, auto regulate it, right? If you can do more and if you recovered, then do more. If you can't, then obviously look at those other things, see if those can be improved, but understand, hey, it might just be a little bit lower. I do think in a deficit, potentially everything will just maybe feel a little bit tougher, right? So you maybe need to push through that kind of mental fatigue. Like you mentioned, the mental fatigue. So you might need to push through that a little bit more and you might start to feel it sooner. It's like in a surplus or at maintenance or surplus, it's like your sets of 10, it starts to get hard at rep 9 or 10, whereas like in a deficit, it might be 7 or 8 that it starts to get a little something like that. And keep taking your creatine too in a fat loss.
Exactly. Keep taking your creatine. Yeah. And this question was asked by Christos, by the way, and I know him. And Christos, man, just keep training like you're training when you go into the cut and then see how it feels and report back in our community. We'll see. We'll help you out.
Yep.
All right. Let's go to the 5th question. Again, this is from my community. Evelyn asked this one, another big hot topic these days. Is menopause and weight loss resistance a thing? And related to this, your advice on programming and nutrition for women over. Big topic, man.
Yeah. I definitely think that as you age, things change, right? Do I think that obviously there's a ton going on in menopause that we can't relate to, but there's a ton of hormonal change going on, right? So I think that's the big thing there is that it just changes things a little bit, but and those things can definitely impact you, right? So I know estrogen will go down and that's gonna affect many things from a woman's perspective. But I think I think people underestimate this, right? I think one kind of common menopausal symptom is like poor sleep, right? What did we talk about sleep earlier, man? That's going to increase your hunger and cravings. You're going to be less motivated to do things. You're not going to make as good of choices. And I think that has a trickle down effect, right? Now you don't want to go training. Maybe you're not moving as much now. Poor sleep can lead to higher stress. Higher stress can lead to, like you talk about visceral fat, right? That can lead to some fat accumulation in midsection particularly. So to me, it's more of a trickle down effect of what's going on and maybe not working with your body and instead trying to work against it and relying on things that maybe you thought you were supposed to do. And again, maybe worked for you when you're 20. And now it's like your body's just changing a little bit and it's just less receptive to it. And I think currently this kind of current state of people that are in menopause, that demographic that are going through that currently, they grew up with this, you need to be skinny, you need to be as small as possible. And that stuff has hung with them because I know any client I have in this age range, that's like the thing of they're just if they gain a pound, it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Again, I don't know if you can relate to that. It seems like that's how it is with this kind of that demographic.
If I wake up and I see very long messages from clients, I know it's usually please help. And it's the whole story of what's going on, which is cool. That's what your coach is for. Often it is related to just a little bit of framing and panicking that goes on, but it's okay. Yeah, to add to some of that, the big note that I had was menopause is this major change and transition in your life. It's physical, it's physiological, but it's also tied in for a lot of women with other things that compound that. You've got the life stress, you've got kids, which then lead to less sleep. You've got things like hot flashes, which also can interrupt sleep. The loss of muscle mass that has been occurring if you have not been training. And for women, it's exacerbated by the hormonal change and bone density decrease. And we can go on. And like Jeff said, lifestyle is the first thing I would go to for all of this stuff. Once you get that dialed in, of course, if things are off like significantly, I knew someone she gained like 80 pounds in 6 months without changing anything. You knew something was up and it was her thyroid. And that can happen as young as I've seen 8 years old. So a lot of women out there, I know we're talking menopause, but the gaslighting in the medical industry and everything that leads to decades of not dealing with the issues. But for many women, that's not the case. So I don't want you to use it as like an excuse. And the tough love, we're a couple dude coaches here. We've worked with a lot of women and a lot of them tell me like, just give me the tough love and help me like do what I need to do. If I'm doing all those things and I know there's still an issue, okay, let's look at hormone therapy and whatever else and take care of all the things outside the gym as well. Like definitely train hard with intensity and execution. Ladies, that's an area of improvement for a lot of you. That's cool. Definitely progress over time, right? To show that expression of strength and muscle mass over time. It's going to make you strong, fierce, lean, tone, whatever words you want to use. And then all the things outside the gym, your stress, your recovery, right? Like how we handle food and the emotional issues around food as well. Like it just goes on and on. So it's a big topic, but like Jeff said, like we have compassion for all of you and we want to help you win this thing on your own with complete freedom and control using lifestyle changes.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit on it perfectly, right? And it is like we said, like you said too, we know it's a tough time, right? Like very empathetic towards that, right? Oh, hey, just it's whatever.
Suck it up. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, we're not saying that. I think a lot of times people overlook that. I would say from a programming perspective, I can just hit on maybe some few like kind of common mistakes I see from a programming and nutrition perspective with this demographic. I think it's one, I think it's the way they train. I think it's like, again, I think their mindset towards exercise is more sweating, more feelings like the exercise is super hard, getting that heart rate up. I have to feel like super beat up, right? Like more cardio based kind of style training. But again, I think any exercise is great. So I don't want to bash that. But I think for this demographic, like this is where we have to like, again, get out of that mindset of what worked in the past. And now we need to start to shift it towards working with our body. And so like you hit on it, hey, let's do some cardio, right? But let's do it for our heart health. Let's not do it for fat loss purposes, right? That's going to come through some nutrition interventions. But from a training perspective, hey, we at this point we need to work on weight training. Again, yes, for muscle, but for bone health too, right? Like in this demographic. So we need to make sure we weight train, and we need it to be in a progressive overload style as well too. So that's the big thing. So the mistake there is training in a way that's just going to burn the most calories, right? With that. From a nutrition perspective, I think two big things that I see is one, trying to always fat loss diet. Okay. So that's the other big mistake here, because we talked about losing lean body mass. We talked about the bone density thing, but also if you're not sleeping well, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? We have that issue and you just have a lot of other stress going on. Again, adding a calorie deficit to that all the time is going to be a stressor on the body. So I'm not saying don't ever fat loss, but I think it would be being smarter about it, being in a smaller calorie deficit and doing it less often there with that. And I think the other thing, and these go hand in hand, or they're two separate, but I'm going to lump them into one, is protein. Like I think protein is something that is important. I personally think protein's maybe been overblown now. Like it's swung to where like people are over relying on protein, but I think in this demographic, you do need to make sure you're hitting about 1 gram per pound of body weight. Again, if you're overweight, maybe a little bit less than that, but I do think it's important, and make sure that you're getting enough protein in. Again, you don't have to get massive amounts, but you make sure you're getting enough. But also carbohydrates, right? Do make sure you're getting some carbohydrates as well too. I think that's only going to help things there with that. And so those would be my kind of like big things aside from the lifestyle stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I'm glad you mentioned carbs, because that has been a game changer for a lot of women I've worked with. And there is such resistance sometimes, even when they're open-minded to the idea of doing it, there's still this built-in either societal or trained behavior over years of being told carbs are bad. And I hear it in a lot of times in the women hosted podcast space, where you've got like the keto and the low carb, like that is the thing for hormones for peri and post menopause. And I'm like, I don't understand it. It may be the thing for an individual for sure. And that's one of the messages we want to get through, is there's something different for everybody. But I ask everybody to experiment with these things. And if you're low on energy, if your training is tough, if your sleep is poor, if your hormones seem off, man, carbs could be the answer. Believe it or not, carbs could be the answer, and just eating more food. Speaking of, so you covered training, and actually the original question was also about, is weight loss resistance a thing? And I did want to address that quickly. I think for men and women as we age, with the loss of muscle mass, if you're fairly sedentary, if you're not training, your metabolic rate is just going to slowly go down over time due to the loss of muscle mass, but also probably lifestyle. You're sleeping less. All the things we talked about before, higher stress, less movement, you're sitting at a desk all day. It just all adds up. And so the appearance of weight loss resistance is definitely a thing. It's only resistance because you can't maintain your weight on the same calories you did 20 years ago without all these other things. The really exciting part about it is you can reverse that, and you can bring it back the other direction so that you can break through, and then it doesn't become a thing. Just knowing that for women, it could be a tiny bit going against you with the hormones, but it's in the noise compared to the lifestyle signal, if you can improve that. So just wanted to touch on that.
No, man, that's a great point, right? The weight loss resistance, right? It's like not, oh, hey, you're in menopause now, and all of a sudden you can't drop weight there with that. That's not the case, right? Again, like you said, things could be a little bit tougher, but it's probably the things that you're doing there. And in your history of, and again, what do we talk about the kind of demographic here, and like what they've been like taught is eat less, move more, burn as many calories as possible. And that does, like, your body will adapt to that. And so like you said there, but the cool thing with that is that's not permanent, right? Like you can do some things to start to improve that as well too. But you may find that initially it is a little challenging because your body has just that, and that's what your body has had to work with. So you sent that message, but the cool thing is you can change that by doing some of these things that we talked about.
Yeah, no, I think that answers it for Evelyn. So maybe we can go to the last one.
Cool. Yep. How do you prep before a season of going nuts with food, Thanksgiving, Christmas? And this is from John. John, you're the only person that would do that.
No, but I do love the question. I
Yep.
wanted it in there verbatim because I think this is a great reframing opportunity. The first thing I would ask you, John, is like, are you really planning to go nuts for a multi-week or multi-month binge fest? That's one thought. Or is this more like, you know that there's a few days coming up here and there, the parties and the holidays. They're 1 or 2 days at most, usually for most people, maybe a few extra days. And is this where your current eating is restrictive, and then the holidays come around, you feel like you can't enjoy them because you're trying to adhere to that form of eating? That's one thing I would ask, just from a reframing, is you could probably, for a lot of people, I would say, who I coach, just relax and enjoy the day, right? Like, just enjoy yourself. You may not even need to track. You may not even need to plan. And the most that it's going to do is, if you overconsume by 2,000 calories or 3,000 calories, you're still going to gain less than a pound of body fat. However, I'm going to say that if you're going to enter a period where you expect to indulge more, I would say, is everything dialed in to begin with, right? Like for John, I'm just going to say all the other things in the rest of this podcast apply to you too. And is all that dialed in? Because I'll tell you what, if it is, I don't even think about holidays anymore. I'm like, everything's great. Holiday comes, enjoy myself, move on. The next day you get back on track. You don't make up for it and you move on. However, if you're going to go on a cruise for a week, I get it, right? There's like unlimited, very rich foods available to you. Can you plan ahead? Sure. Like, you can be prudent and have a little bit of restraint if you'd like ahead of time, and have maybe even do a little mini cut or whatever. But you can prioritize your protein. You can maybe bank a tiny bit of calories here and there. There's little strategies like that. But I think the most important strategy is just to plan for it and give yourself a plan of what works for you that doesn't feel restrictive. And that could be like, okay, I'm going to have 3 drinks instead of unlimited drinks of alcohol, or I'm going to eat all my protein and salad type foods first, and then I'm going to indulge on grandma's apple pie. It's just simple. We're adults here. And I heard somebody say on a podcast, you can go to the grocery store right now and buy an entire cake and eat the whole cake if you want. We have that choice as adults. You're not going to do that though. And so there's a spectrum of choice here. So let's reframe it. Let's not sweat over it, and let's do all the other things we talked about in this episode. I think it would be golden. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, no, man, those are great points. Like, definitely have some sort of structure to it. I think that this is where sometimes from a mental perspective, you can start to see how people think with some of this stuff. Oh, I need it to be all or nothing. I either need to be fully on it or I can't do anything at all. Okay, you're missing out on a ton. And if that's your thought process, it's not the Thanksgiving that's the issue. That now it's a mindset thing that needs to be worked on there with that, right? This reminds me, I like to put money away for my investments account, my retirement accounts and things like that. I got to a number in my head that I needed to put away each month. And it's like, lately expenses are up and I haven't been able to put all that in, but I'm like, dude, why? I don't need to put that. I can put in a lesser amount and it's fine. Like, it's still going to help build it. But I started to see this like all or nothing mindset think into it. And I think that kind of reminds me of that there. But no, you had great points there. Have some sort of structure. Something is going to be helpful on there with that. And you may have hit on this, but like some things that I thought of were like, it's not those events that are the issues. It's what you're doing outside of it that I think is the most important. If you're staying on top of it, then again, maybe not even 100%, that's better than you just, yesterday was Thanksgiving. So you know what, now I'm going to also go and eat 2 pizzas for the day. It's, come on. All right. You need to, like, what you're doing outside of that's going to be key. But like we said, I think other things it can do are lift weights, because again, if you're, say you are in some sort of energy surplus and you're lifting weights, hey, that's going to be better that can help you build some lean body mass in the process. Make sure you're moving, getting your steps in throughout that time, because that's going to help you increase your energy expenditure. I think this period of time comes with colder weather, and I think people tend to be less active during this period of time. And if you're not weight training and you're not staying active and you are eating a lot of food, it's like, where's that food going to go? You're not really, your body's going to be like, oh, well, hey, let's store this as body fat. Whereas if you stay active and you lift weights, like, that's going to help shuttle that food into place, like, again, to your muscle. It will shuttle it to your muscle and you can use it for energy, and it's not going to get stored as body fat. So those would be the big things there with that. And maybe here's one like last thing I would add to this is maybe reframe, like, when you're going to try to drop weight or lose body fat, is that the best time to do it then? Can you maybe from like October to January, maybe that's your maintenance time, right? You're more focused on you're not focused on losing weight. You're more focused on, so then that way it's, because if you go into the holiday season coming off a cut, you lost 20 pounds, you're being restrictive, you're super hungry. Now it's going to be really hard to manage that period of time. So maybe use that as a time where, hey, I'm not going to fat loss diet during this period of time. I'm going to wait till January starts or something like that. Just another potential thing you can add in there.
Yeah, that was, I actually added, I wrote that as you were talking and then you beat me to it. But
aligning
your periodization of your nutrition with the year or with the seasons is really good. I almost inevitably do that with clients. We try to depending on when they start during the year, we look at that and we say, okay, does it make sense to be fat loss, have a fat loss phase here, or would we rather be eating more here? And this can go for the short term as well. If you're going to have a 2-week long vacation or you're going on a trip or something like that, those are moments for diet breaks. Those are moments for going back to maintenance. If it's a bunch of those, like in a short period, like 3 or 4 months, maybe that's your bulking or your maintenance season. I know, Jeff, you're big on like recomp and maintaining kind of that leanness, but I would even say if you're willing to just gain the weight, that's a perfect time to do it as well. I try to do that because most people who aren't tracking any of this stuff, who are not in our world, gain all their weight in those couple of years, months of the year, which is insane. You think we got 12 months out of the year and they gain it all then. But if you intentionally gain there because you're building muscle, then great. Then you just solve the problem. You just offset the problem because the rest of the year tends to be easier, quote unquote.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just make sure you're lifting weights in that process. I think anytime if you're going to be gaining a little bit of weight, if you can lift weights, that's going to help offset some of that weight gain, at least help shuttle it for better use there with that.
Yeah, man, I think that's it. I don't know if we wanted to add anything else to this or
no,
start to
I
wrap
feel
up,
good with
right?
it.
Cool, man. That was a lot of questions, but I thought it was nice to have both of us there and share our perspectives and bounce off each other. And thank you for doing this because this is a co-hosted episode. It's dropping on 2 podcasts. If you're listening, it's Wits and Weights and the Mind Muscle Connection. And you got to see some similar but unique perspectives from 2 different coaches who we care a lot about our clients and about you as the listener as well. And at the end of the day, you've got to find what works best for you and find the information and a community or coach that can help you, especially if you want to accelerate getting to that answer for you. So those are my closing thoughts.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you for, like I said, you got all this set up, man. I thought this was super fun and I would love to do more of these. I think it's really cool to get these questions from both of our communities and share our thoughts on them as well. But yeah, no, like you said, there was a ton of information in here, but I think probably the takeaways are get good sleep, lift some weights, and look at your mindset and work on that with the coach because that can be super helpful there with that. So yeah, a ton of great information. I think ton that you can take away in this. Yeah, I think now I'm gonna hand it back to you there for that.
Yeah. And for those listening, if you want to hear us do this again, send us a message. We both have our contact information in the show notes, whether it's IG or email, and send us your questions or just tell us what you thought about the show and anything we could do differently. And to the Wits and Weights community, don't forget to look for the Mind Muscle Connection in your podcast app. Go subscribe and follow right now. You won't regret it. You'll get a ton of awesome episodes in the near future. I think he drops 3 a week of just solid gold. And I'll include the link to his show in my show notes.
Yep, absolutely. And same thing for my audience. Go follow Wits and Weights, subscribe, leave a comment as well too. Phillip loves those comments as well. He loves getting those. I know you also have a really good community as well too. And I think you just opened you have an education platform as well too. I think that you.
Yeah, man. No, thanks for the plug. Yeah, it's called Wits and Weights Physique University. It's courses and community. Yeah. Sounds
awesome. Sounds like stuff that would be right up the audience's alley there with that. So yeah, definitely go check that out. And again, man, appreciate you putting this together. You definitely, I'll have to say, and I said this earlier, Phillip definitely took the lead on this and really got it together. So appreciate that. And like I said, it was super organized on your part. So appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Giving each other a spot. That's what we do.
Yep.
All right. It was a lot of fun, man. Thanks for doing this.
Yep. Thank you too. I had fun.